Welcome to Coffee Break with Rachel V. Hill, presented by Superbook Sports. Taking a daily look at the biggest stories in Denver sports and interacting live with you, the Coffee Break fam. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe, and enjoy your coffee break. Here's your host, Rachel V. Hill.
Hey, it is a Victory Monday in the Mile High City. I'm James Merlett, filling in for Rachel V. Hill. He's Andrew Mason, joining us for just the second time this year, Mace, that we get to talk about a Broncos win on a Monday morning here on Coffee Break. How are you? Are you feeling chipper, excited? Because, hey, we're talking about a W this time around.
The locker room was certainly a lot more chipper than it has been. So it's just good to see some positive reinforcement. And actually, I asked Sean Payton about this about 20 minutes ago on the conference call, and I asked kind of how it helps teaching-wise when you have something positive that can serve as evidence. Okay, we're putting all this work into it, and we're getting positive results. I asked it specifically on how, remember back in September through the Bears game, there were a lot of procedural issues pre-snap. And so it was about getting the cadence right, trying to shorten the play calls and all that. And here we are. They've had only one false start penalty in the last 3 weeks. That was yesterday by Mike McGlinchey. So when you've taken, what was it, 5 false start penalties that were on the offensive line in the Bears game, and then only one in the last 3 games, you can point to that and say that's working. And then a victory also has that same kind of reinforcement. So I think even though we don't know the impact of this for a while, he's got some things that he can point to, even with a 2-5 record, to tell his players, look, if you stick with this, it's going to get some results for you.
Yeah, look, this is a team that has found unique and unusual and creative ways to lose seemingly every week, right? So when they find a way to win a game yesterday that they had total control of, it's 16-3 in the third quarter, all of a sudden the defense gives up 2 long touchdown drives. They give up a touchdown, one of which could have been an interception by Pat Surtain. The second one was a 4th and goal that bounces off of one receiver, goes right into the hands of another receiver. Like 2 fluky touchdowns that Mace, we all probably were thinking we're going to be sitting here talking about, I can't believe the Broncos, they Broncoed again, right? Like, how did they lose it? Those 2 plays would just kind of embody everything that's been wrong with this franchise. Instead, they find a way to win, and they do it with a game-winning drive from Russell Wilson that leads to a 52-yard field goal from Will Lutz, and then the defense gets a stop with P.J. Locke getting the interception. So it's offense, defense, and special teams once they were down 17-16 in this, the latter part of the fourth quarter that pulled out the victory. I get it. It's 19-17. I get it. It gets them to 2-5. I get it that, it's not necessarily the most riveting of games, but to me, Mace, that is a step in the right direction that all 3 phases had to step up, make plays at the end of the game, and they did. That's huge to me. I don't think that can be understated.
Yeah, and it's against a shaky team, and the Bears were a shaky team a few weeks ago. But you mentioned all 3 phases, and I think just kind of the morale of things. You pointed to the deflected touchdown there that actually put the Packers in front. At that moment, Green Bay has scored on consecutive possessions. There were probably at least 15, maybe 20,000 Packer fans in that stadium yesterday. And you're hearing go Pack, go Pack, go, like you're at Lambeau Field. And that's a moment where we've seen the Broncos in recent years fall into here we go again mode, right? And instead, you mentioned the 3 phases. The offense quickly gets its feet back under them, gets in field goal range. Will Lutz, who, by the way, everyone was frustrated with him after week 1, and he hasn't missed a kick since then. And I even, in the press box, said, he's been perfect since week 1. And people are like, hey, don't put the jinx on him. Well, he stayed perfect yesterday, so maybe he is jinx immune, as it were. And then the defense getting to stop. Again, with a hand from a shaky team. You had the Elton Jenkins holding penalty, and that got them into a long yardage situation. But how many times have we seen the Broncos get a little break like that and then still fritter it away, right? In the last few years. And they didn't do that yesterday. It's baby steps, but it's progress.
They found a way to win as opposed to finding a way to lose, which had become the norm. I think that's worth celebrating. Let's look at the positives here first. So offensively, I thought Russell Wilson had a fine game. 20 of 29, 194 yards. He threw a touchdown, had no picks, 98.9 quarterback rating. Might have been over 100 if he didn't have to throw it away. The Pat Shurmur play to end the game, right? We're trying to throw incompletions to burn out the clock. I thought he played
with
fine.
Pat Shurmur, it was caught. Remember? Right. 3 years ago?
Right. But look, he was fine. I thought he moved around well. He bought time. He moved the chains with his feet. I thought Russ played well. Javonte Williams looked like Javonte Williams of old yesterday. 15 carries, 82 yards. I thought he really played well. Cortland Sutton, 6 catches, 76 and a touchdown. Jerry Jeudy, 5 catches for 64. And then you mentioned it, Will Lutz, 4 for 4 on field goals, including a 52-yard game winner. Those are some positives right there that I think can be built upon offensively, even though it only ended up in 19 points. They only punted 3 times. For the most part, they were pretty efficient, needed to be better in the red zone, but some positives offensively to build upon.
Yeah, and you think of the red zone, I mean, we're having a completely different conversation if Quinn Bailey doesn't get that penalty on what would have been a first possession touchdown, right? Then we're talking about 2 red zone touchdowns. And frankly, if not for that Quinn Bailey penalty, we're talking about the Broncos winning the game comfortably. But alas, that's part and parcel of this. And look, there are reasons why you look at the Broncos and say, okay, it's still a team that's got a long ways to go, right? And there, you can look at some miscues like that. You can look at the pass rush yesterday really not being all that effective in terms of generating a lot of pressure on Jordan Love. There are still a lot of things that are not right about this team, but you went through the receivers, the production, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy. I actually think on Cortland Sutton, it really leads to an interesting discussion, and maybe the discussion on Cortland Sutton is going to be more interesting this week than the discussion regarding Jerry Jeudy, because Sutton, he's got 5 touchdowns. His career high is 6. He has more touchdowns this year than the last 3 seasons combined, 33 games played over those seasons. Clearly, this is the best we've seen from him overall since before the ACL. So then it becomes, okay, is Cortland Sutton going to be somebody who's helping us out of this long term? Or is this a sell high situation? Maybe he has more appeal to teams looking for wide receivers than Jerry Jeudy, because Judy's comments and the things he said probably aren't going to go over well with some teams, but Cortland Sutton has, by and large, avoided those sort of missteps.
Yeah, he had the 1 touchdown for the Broncos last week in Kansas City as well, which was a great catch. It wasn't necessarily the 50-50 ball where he went and jumped over the defender like we used to see at training camp all the time early in Cortland's career, but it was a great catch in the end zone on a contested ball. So he's starting to kind of round back into form. Let's focus on a couple of things, though, Mase, that I thought were the 2 big negatives in the game, red zone being one of them, but the other 2 were on the defensive side of the ball. First one was Broncos, they score. They get the Cortland Sutton touchdown, go up 16-3. Russ is pumping his fist. Everybody's fired up. The crowd finally gets into it. And, man, this defense has a way of letting teams back in the game at just an amazing, amazing level, right? If you can go force a 3 and out there, you got all the momentum. Maybe you put the game away. Instead, on the next 2 possessions, they give up a 9-play drive, 75 yards, 11-play drive, 74 yards. Both end up in touchdowns. The Packers run 20 plays, nearly 150 yards offense, 2 touchdowns. Broncos ran 3. Sandwiched in between those drives was a 3 and out, which everybody's going to blame on Russ. He was 1 for 1. It's not his fault. Adam Troutman can't escape anything, and it's not his fault they called a fullback dive on 3rd and short. Those 2 possessions, it's like, man, this team, and I get it, they made the play at the end of the game, but this defense just can't sort of, put the old the nail in the coffin, so to speak here. They just can't close the deal. They have a way of letting teams back in it, Mace.
It felt kind of like the Raiders game back in week 1, right? Where you're allowing some extended drives. And in the middle of that, remember the offense had a 3-and-out there.
Yep.
It was that early in the fourth quarter, I believe. And it was sort of the same thing yesterday. They're on their heels a bit. And this is where the whole complementary football thing comes into play, right? It's on the offense to, if not necessarily score, give the defense a chance to catch its breath. And I think some of that is what led to the second score. Also, on the defensive side, one of the things that concerns me, the tackling, not great yesterday. Another game with a fair amount of missed tackles. Now, the Packers have some bruising running backs, no doubt, but you're still seeing too many guys flail out there on the defensive side. And that's where, again, I did make the point earlier on the Elton Jenkins penalty. If he doesn't have that holding penalty, what are we talking about as a result of this game? Is the defense making a stop there, or are the Packers getting the game-winning field goal and winning at 20-19?
Until that penalty, it felt like the Broncos were going to give up a game-winning field goal at the gun. It just felt like it was going that direction. Those of us watching it on TV, the target line was right there where they were about to get to. It just felt like it was heading that direction. That certainly bailed the Broncos out to some extent. The other big negative to me, Mace, and the 2 timeouts, that's unacceptable on defense. But one of them, at least, was tied to the fact that P.J. Locke was in the game instead of Kareem Jackson, and they didn't have the right personnel on the field. Kareem Jackson, twice in 7 games, has been ejected. Not got a penalty. He's got a penalty in more than 2 games. He's been ejected in 2 of the 7 games. I thought yesterday's was a good call by the officials. I thought it was an egregious hit. I thought for 2023, that's going to get called 100% of the time. And, you can talk about how, and you and I got a lot of this on social media yesterday, you can talk about how, they don't let them hit anymore in football. Fine. You may be right, but that's the way the game is called nowadays. That's the rules. It's not 1985 anymore. Kareem Jackson is hurting his team, and he seems a bit out of control. And the Broncos need to figure out, hey, how do they resolve this? Because he's become a problem at this point.
Yeah. Now that was something Sean Payton alluded to this morning, and I agree with Sean Payton. I don't think there is malicious intent on the part of Kareem Jackson at all. I think he's playing the game at full speed. However, Payton, who is on the competition committee, has been as well, did point to the fact that Musgrave was defenseless and said that it's something that on the committee we're trying to educate players on, right? And that's kind of the key thing. I mean, everyone's sort of is saying, oh, well, it was the shoulder first and all that. And the big thing is that you had a defenseless receiver there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he does lead with his shoulder, but you do have the helmet that's coming up to the face mask in the head area, right? I mean, there's that one angle. It's the field level angle from behind the end zone. Oh, it's all shoulder. Then you see the reverse angle from the traditional TV shot that's up top, and you can see the helmet kind of go, working its way up into this area on Luke Musgrave. And so I can see why the ejection happened. I think, it was a fair call. It's not ejections aren't about intent sometimes or malicious intent. It's about what happens. And again, the defenseless receiver thing is something the league has emphasized time and time again. And when you have the fines that have accumulated for Kareem Jackson, I will be surprised if we're not talking about a suspension. And you know what? Based on what we saw from PJ Locke yesterday, I think the Broncos are going to be okay if they have to play without Kareem Jackson. And I think certainly having PJ Locke instead of De'Aaron Turner-Yell making his first start, because remember, DTY had to come in for Justin Simmons against Miami. And, of course, Turner-Yell had to play safety down the stretch against Washington in week 2. With all respect to Turner-Yell, those were his first times around in the NFL, getting defensive regular season reps. I wonder if maybe at least that Washington game would have been different with PJ Locke, or maybe the game against Miami. You still lose, but maybe we're not talking about the first 70-point game allowed by a team in 57 years. I'd like to see PJ Locke get a long look.
Yeah, no, and I thought he played well yesterday. I mean, again, there were some issues with getting the right personnel on and all the rest of that because you're dealing with something you weren't maybe obviously you weren't expecting. But I thought he played well when he was on the field. Obviously, he had the interception that sealed the win late in the game, so that was a big play. Let's transition to the big topic of the day. I wrote about it at denversports.com. I was on Schlereth and Evans this morning. It was the topic. For the most part, I think in Broncos country, the win yesterday was met with a, all we did was hurt our chances at Caleb Williams. Mase, I am so anti-tanking. It's ridiculous. I mean, look, we're still more than a week away from Halloween, and teams and people just want the team to wave the white flag and tank for Caleb Williams. Look, Caleb Williams needs to go beat Utah before I'm convinced he's going to be the answer to beat the Chiefs. I'm sure he's going to be a good player. But, hey, you tank for this guy. You move on from Russell Wilson. Now you got $85 million in dead cap to deal with a rookie quarterback. That sounds like a great scenario. I just think that teams, you have to establish, hey, here's our formula for success. Here's how we win. There were 2 examples of it a year ago, so I'll bring them up real quick. At one point at their bye, the Jaguars were 3-7. They had lost 6 out of 7 games, including loss to the Broncos in London. They went on to win 6 of their last 7, go 9-8, win a bad AFC South, win a playoff game. They're now 5-2, atop their division and a contender for the Super Bowl. The Lions, which, it's what Sean Payton talked about last week. They were 1-6. They finished 9-8, don't make the playoffs, but take yesterday out of it. They're 5-2. They're atop the NFC North. They're 2 teams that didn't just say, let's tank and try and get the number 1 pick. They spent the rest of their season trying to figure out what is our formula for success, and they've been able to build upon it. That's what the Broncos need to do here. Find out who's in the boat, who's not in the boat. This whole wave the white flag, try to lose thing, man, it is such a loser's mentality. It is driving me crazy. And the fact that people are irritated that this team won a game and avoided the first ever 0-4 start at home in Broncos history has me banging my head against the desk. It really does.
Well, I know people were talking about it. Personally, I tend to feel that the tanking, focusing on the draft discussion is not something you really want to think about until Thanksgiving, right? And you mentioned the 2 teams last year that turned their fortunes around, Jacksonville and Detroit. They got it going in November. So here we are in October. November is still there in play for the Broncos to rally themselves, get something going. Like if you get that turnaround like the last 4 weeks or so in December into January, that's like the September false positives that you see in baseball sometimes. We lost 95 games, but we went 17-10 in September. That usually doesn't mean anything.
Sure.
And I think if you see it in the last 4 games of an NFL season, it's similar. But when that turnaround begins around mid-season and carries over, that's something a little bit different. And so we're still sitting here, even though are the possibilities great that the Broncos can get it going that quickly? Honestly, no, because you still have the Chiefs and you still have the Bills coming up in your next 2 games. So the chances, unfortunately, of the Broncos being 2-7 are still pretty high, but you still have to play this out. I do wonder this, though, James. There are some who believe the trade deadline should be later in the season, and I wonder if it were Thanksgiving rather than Halloween, how different the discussions would be. Having it on Halloween after that 8th week means you have to sort of have a perception of a commitment one way or the other before your season is halfway done. If you did it, say, right after Thanksgiving weekend, you'd be a little further down the line. And I think then if you're going to focus on the teardown and rebuild, that's probably a clearer time to do it than when you could be sitting there at a 2-6 mark, from which it's not likely that you recover, but it's still relatively possible.
Yeah, and you still have something to play for, even if you don't make the playoffs, right? Like the Lions didn't make the playoffs a year ago, but again, they found kind of their winning formula. They found their mojo, and that has.
But they were in contention until the end. Like they actually didn't get. They literally went in because remember their game got flexed on week 17 because there was that possibility, but that between them and Green Bay, it could be a winner take all. And then Seattle won, and then it was just Green Bay trying to get in, but Detroit still won that game. But that's how close they were. They were playing relevant football really right up until the end. So that's kind of the circumstance you like. I'm not sure it has the same type of effect if you're winning a few games to go 7-10 at the end of the season, rather than getting to 9-8 and being right there knocking on the door.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. But here's the other part of it. Like, and you're much more of a NFL historian than I am, so educate me on this. When has a team tanked and it turned into this great run of championships, right? Like, you look at just the teams that have won a title since the Broncos won Super Bowl 50. It's the Chiefs a couple times, it's the Patriots a couple times, it's the Eagles a couple times, and it's the Bucks. None of them tanked. Right? Like, I get it. Tom Brady kind of, helps out 3 of those, but none of them tanked, got the number 1 pick, and that's why they were able to turn things around. That wasn't their formula. The Colts, they did the old suck for luck thing. And yeah, Andrew Luck was a good player, but it's not, if you're sitting up in the cheap seats at Lucas Oil Field, you can still see the game. It's not all these championship banners blocking your view, right? From the Andrew Luck era. I just don't think it works. Like, history suggests playing it out and trying to find a winning formula does work. Whereas, hey, we're going to tank and try to get the number 1 overall pick. There's just not this track record of teams that have used that to launch this decade-long run of being a contender.
Well, they've got banners in Indianapolis from Andrew Luck, but they're things like AFC finalist, right? They hang all sorts of banners at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah. Coors Field-esque over there, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of participation trophies there in the rafters at that stadium. But well, a couple of things about tanking. First of all, it has to happen on an organizational level because you can't. The players are still going to give their all, right? Like we've seen, for example, let's go back to 2020. The Jets look like they were right there, going to get the number 1 overall pick. Whoops. And then Jacksonville ends up getting it. Let's just say I think the Jets would have been in a lot better situation if they had not won a late season game at home.
Here's a counter, though. Last year, the Texans won late, lose the first round pick. They got the better quarterback getting C.J. Stroud instead of Bryce Young.
How do we know they wouldn't have taken C.J. Stroud otherwise?
We don't, but I think it's the football gods, lowercase g. They didn't intentionally try to lose. End up with I just think it's messing with karma, mojo, vibe, whatever you want to call it. I just think it's bad for business. But look, I think it all comes down to this Sunday's game, right? If the Broncos can find a way to end the streak, and what are we at now? 16 consecutive losses to the Chiefs?
16 in a row, yep.
If they can find some sort of way to end the streak, and they're 3-5, heading into the trade deadline, heading into the bye, I don't think there are wholesale changes. They may still trade Jerry Jeudy, but it's not a fire sale. If they're 2-6 and they've lost 17 in a row to the Chiefs, they got a bye followed by a Monday night trip to Buffalo coming up, we could see it turn into a fire sale. I really do think it sounds funny for a 2-5 team. I think Sunday's game, Adam Power Field against the Chiefs, I think it's a monster game for the Broncos. I think it dictates how the rest of their season goes.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and maybe seasons beyond as well. And then on top of that, the morale. I mean, you could have a 7-10 season that's frustrating, But if it involves a win over the Chiefs and snapping that streak, that's the moment to which you're pointing and saying, okay, this is starting to go in the correct direction, right?
Right.
Look, I talked about it in the short weekly and Thursday Night Football. You played the Jets, you played the Chiefs. You were expecting to beat the Jets. Oops, you didn't. And then I said before that Chiefs game, look, if you turn around and you upset the Chiefs, nobody remembers the Jets game, right? Like if you, and I'd say even the same thing, if you end this month by stunning the Chiefs and stopping that streak, all of a sudden that Jets game, I don't think you view in the same with the same lens going forward. The question is this team really capable of doing that? Because you do look at the wins they've had. I would argue the 2 wins the Broncos have accumulated so far this season come against teams that are pretty firmly in the bottom 6 of the NFL. Right now, Green Bay, they have 1 win over the Bears, another bottom 6 team, and their other win over New Orleans when Carr gets hurt, and that allows them to come back late in that game. It's, right now, if you add the Chiefs game to it, it changes the entire perception of it. But if you lose to the Chiefs and you're 2-6 and your wins aren't really anything to shout about, then I think but that's what's on the line this week is how you feel about this and how you feel about the progress of things. We've seen incremental progress, right? Special teams is much better than it has been in a long time around here. Okay. That area is getting results. The defense, even though it took a step back in the red zone yesterday and did need that holding penalty to kind of help bail things out at the end, the defense is not leaking touchdowns anywhere close to where it was throughout September and then early on in that Chicago game. I think Sean Payton yesterday in his play calling was very disciplined in sticking with the run. He's talked about how he's got to persist with it, and he did do that. And then I brought up on the conference call this morning, he got 1 false start in the last 3 games after a parade of false starts in the first 4 games, right? So they did a lot of work on things like cadence, on shortening the play calls, everything pre-snap. So you see the areas where the Broncos put the work in, they're getting results and they're improving. Is that enough to where we're talking about this team having a surge or not? Because the other thing also beyond Kansas City, Buffalo here in the next 2 games is you're staring at a 3-game road swing in December. And we've seen very good Broncos teams struggle on 3-game road swings. The 2014 team went 12-4. Well, they went 1-2 on a 3-game roadie, including a loss at St. Louis, which wasn't a very good team there. So that's the thing where I look at realistically and say, all right, these 2 games plus that 3-game road swing, the chances of having that sort of Detroit-Jacksonville revival are remote. But I think we probably let it go until Sunday.
It's just a lot of season to be played, right? You look at the standings; they're half a game behind the Chargers. You win on Sunday, which is a big, big if. I mean, we're playing the hypothetical here, but I do think it drastically kind of changes the outlook. And then you're going into the bye week, looking at it of, all right, here's a reset moment where we can kind of shore up even a few more things that have been problematic during the start of the season. I just think everybody's too knee-jerk, right? Both positive and negative. It's, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Trade everybody. It's fire sale time because the Broncos are 1-5. And 3 weeks ago up in Boulder, everybody's saying give Prime a lifetime contract. And he blows a 29-0 lead to Stanford. Maybe we don't want to Dan Hawkins this thing quite yet, Mace. So I just think it's, give it a little time. Let's see how it all plays out. Look, I'm not saying anybody should be planning a championship parade because they beat the Packers yesterday. I just don't think people should be saying, "Oh no, they won a game. Woe is us." I think that is a bad mentality. But hey, we got to talk about.
Let me ask me real quick though. If somebody called the Broncos and offered them a 1st-round pick for Justin Simmons or a 2nd-round pick for Cortland Sutton this week, didn't wait for the deadline this week, would you take it?
Yeah, I would. I would. Now, and I'm going to write about this later in the week. You got to be careful with the fire sale, though, right? Like Garrett Bowles to me is the interesting one. If somebody offers you anything other than a first-round pick for Garrett Bowles, which you're not going to get, how are you replacing Garrett Bowles? Now all you're doing is creating a situation where you've got the same problem at left tackle. You've had at right tackle for almost a decade. Garrett Bowles ain't great, but tell me the game they lost because Garrett Bowles couldn't block the opposing team's best pass rusher. It just doesn't exist in the last 3 or 4 years. So they got to be careful. You can replace Justin Simmons. You can replace Cortland Sutton. Premium positions, left tackle, cornerback. If somebody wants to give you 2 1s for Pat Surtain, make the deal. If not, pass. And then quarterback, you better have a plan if you're going to move on. But that is another topic for another day.
Yeah. We could do an entire show about how Surtain should not be traded under any circumstance right now, and how if we are talking about QB in next year's draft, Surtain's value may have to be as part of a trade to move up, very similar to DJ Moore going from Carolina to Chicago to move up, right? I think that's the discussion that ends up being had regarding whether you trade Surtain or not. But it's not something the Broncos want to do at all. And with Bowlesy, that could be an entire show because, I know he had the holding penalty yesterday. He's played a lot better this year than he had in the last couple of seasons. And there's a conversation to be had about whether – I know Bowles has the big number on his contract and you can save some money by cutting him. Whether the best move on Bowles might be to restructure and then figure out a way to sign Lloyd Cushenberry, because this offensive line is much better than it has been, and it's getting some cohesion. It's wild to talk about how the weak spot on the line is the guy that you gave the big free agent contract to in the offseason, but that's kind of been what it is. If you can get McGlinchey just up a little bit closer to the level at which he's played, you actually have an O-line that you could, whether it's Russell Wilson or a young quarterback you draft, that you could put that quarterback behind him and that QB is going to have a shot.
Yeah, and that's another factor in the Bowlesy thing, and we got to run. But, you want to tank for Caleb Williams? You might want to make sure he's got a left tackle that you can at least depend on, as opposed to you're trying to plug that with a free agent at that point because you use your first-round pick on Caleb Williams. You ain't replacing Garrett Bowles in the first round. So another topic for another day. Gives us a lot to go over all week as we talk about Broncos getting ready for the Chiefs. What are they going to do with the trade deadline? Never a dull moment in Broncos country. But, hey, Mase, we got to talk about a win today. That's a positive, great way to start the week. I appreciate you joining us here on Coffee Break.
You too. Good to see you.